You think making Israel jealous means copying Jewish practices. And honestly, it sounds logical at first, because if Israel has Shabbat, then maybe we should keep Shabbat. And if Israel has the feasts, then maybe we should celebrate the feasts. And if Israel has Torah, then maybe we should take it on ourselves. But here's the problem no one really stops to think about. Does imitation actually create jealousy? Or does it just blur the lines until there's nothing left to react to? Because jealousy only happens when something is clearly yours appears somewhere it shouldn't be. Not when someone simply mirrors what you already have. Now, don't misunderstand this, because this is important. There is something beautiful about the desire behind it. There is something right about wanting to honor what God gave in the scriptures. The feasts are not random traditions. They are appointed times. The rhythms are not man-made inventions. They are woven into the story itself. And when people from the nations begin to respect that, to lean into that, even to celebrate that, it can genuinely touch something deep in a Jewish heart. Because it shows honor, it shows recognition, it shows that what God did with Israel still matters. But here's where everything quietly shifts without people realizing it. Because what begins as honor can slowly turn into identity. And what begins as appreciation can turn into imitation, and before long, the focus is no longer on encountering the God of Israel, but on trying to resemble Israel itself. And that shift is subtle, but critical. Because you can adopt practices without ever being transformed. You can take on rhythms without ever meeting the one who gave them. And when that happens, something essential is lost, even though everything on the outside looks right. So instead of asking, what should we do? Maybe the real question is one that almost no one is asking, and it's this. What actually causes jealousy in the first place? What is it that would make someone look at another and feel that something deeply familiar has appeared in a place it doesn't belong? Because if we don't answer that correctly, we might spend years building something that looks right on the surface, but completely misses the very thing it was supposed to produce. Because here's the tension that most people don't see yet. The Jewish people already have a system that preserves practices. They already have a framework that guards every detail, every boundary, every expression of life around God. And it has been developed, refined, and protected for generations. So if the answer was simply more people copying those same practices, then nothing new would actually appear, nothing unexpected would emerge, and nothing would provoke the kind of response Paul is describing, which means we are probably looking in the wrong direction. Because the truth is, the Jewish people already have something most people from the outside don't fully understand. They already have a system that is incredibly detailed, incredibly disciplined, and incredibly committed to preserving every aspect of life connected to God. From the smallest daily actions to the highest holy days, everything is structured. Everything is guarded and everything is taken seriously, and this system is known today as Rabbinic Judaism, a framework that has developed over centuries with one clear goal: to protect, preserve, and define how the people of Israel live in relation to God. But here's where a distinction must be made, and it's a distinction that almost no one talks about clearly, because there's a difference between the faith of the scriptures and the system that later grew around it. There's a difference between what we see in the lives of Abraham, Moses, David, and the prophets, and what developed generations later as a structured religious framework. And unless you see that difference, everything becomes blurred, because you start assuming that what exists today is exactly what was always meant to be, when in reality, something has shifted over time. And this is where something deeply important is happening right now, because many Israelis today are not rejecting God, they are not walking away from the idea of faith. They are actually searching. But what they are searching for is not more structure, not more rules, not more layers of tradition, because in many cases, they already feel surrounded by that. What they are searching for is something far more basic and far more powerful. They are searching for the God they read about in the scriptures. Because from a young age, Israeli children grow up reading the Bible in school. They see the stories. They hear about a God who speaks, who moves, who intervenes in history, a God who calls people, leads people, delivers people. And then something happens. They look at the reality around them, and they don't always see that same God reflected in the systems they know. And so the question begins to form, sometimes quietly, sometimes out loud, the same question Gideon once asked. Where is the God our fathers told us about? And this is the tension, because when faith becomes primarily about maintaining structure, it is possible to preserve everything externally while losing something internally. It is possible to have the calendar, the practices, the language, the identity, and yet still feel that something is missing. And many people feel that, even if they don't always know how to articulate it. Because deep down, they're not just looking for a system to follow. They are looking for a God who is real, So now come back to the original idea. If someone from the nations looks at this and says, the solution is to copy the system, then what exactly are they adding? What new thing is being revealed? What unexpected reality is appearing? Because if all that is happening is more people adopting the same external structure, then nothing changes, nothing challenges, nothing provokes, and certainly nothing creates the kind of tension that would make someone stop and ask deeper questions. So now we have to ask the question that changes everything. What actually creates jealousy? Because jealousy is not a reaction to imitation. It is a reaction to something real appearing in an unexpected place. It is when something that feels deeply familiar, something that belongs to you, suddenly shows up somewhere it should not be, and not as a copy, not as an imitation, but as something alive, something undeniable, something that cannot be easily explained away. Because imitation can be explained, imitation can be categorized, imitation can be dismissed as someone trying to adopt a culture or a system, but presence is different. Presence is something you feel, something you recognize, even if you don't want to admit it. And when the God of Israel is visibly at work, not in theory, not in language, but in reality, that is something no system can contain and no explanation can fully neutralize. And this is where the tension becomes almost uncomfortable, because the idea is not that the nations become Israel. The idea is that the God of Israel becomes visible among the nations, not replacing Israel, not redefining Israel, but appearing in a place where he was not expected to be seen in that way, and that creates a kind of friction that cannot be ignored, because it forces a question that cuts deeper than tradition. Because imagine seeing something that feels like it belongs to your story, your history, your God, but it is happening in people who were never part of that story. People who did not grow up with your identity, your language, your traditions, and yet somehow there is something there that feels authentic, something that carries weight, something that feels alive, and that creates a tension that imitation never could. That is the moment where questions begin. Not the kind of questions people ask in debates, but the kind that sit quietly and refuse to go away. The kind that makes someone wonder whether what they have assumed all along is incomplete, whether something has been missed, whether there is more to the story than what they have known. And this is not triggered by someone copying what already exists. It is triggered by something that feels real enough to challenge what exists. Because external form has a limit. It can guide behavior, it can preserve identity, it can create continuity, but it cannot produce life on its own. And this is where everything shifts. Because if what people are truly searching for is life, if what they are longing for is a real encounter with God, then no amount of external imitation will satisfy that. And no amount of structure will replace that. And when something real appears, when there is transformation, when there is a visible connection to the God of Israel, that is not based on imitation, but on something deeper, something internal, something that cannot be manufactured. That is when the difference becomes undeniable. That is when it is no longer about what someone is doing, but about what is actually happening. And that is the point where everything changes. So let's bring this into focus, because this is where many people get pulled in two directions. On one side, there is a genuine desire to honor what God gave, to respect the scriptures, to take seriously the feasts, the rhythms, the things that were entrusted to Israel. And that desire is not wrong. It is good. It is healthy. It reflects a recognition that what God established was not meaningless and not temporary. But the danger comes when that respect turns into confusion, when honoring what God gave becomes replacing the very thing that gives it life. Because the heart of the matter was never about external form alone. It was never about who can replicate the system more accurately. It was always about something deeper, something internal, something that the prophets spoke about again and again. A change that does not begin on the outside, but on the inside. Something that cannot be achieved by copying behavior. Something that cannot be inherited by tradition, but something that must happen within a person. And this is why so many in Israel today are not impressed by imitation, because they already have a system that preserves the external. They already have a framework that defines the details. What they're searching for is not more of the same. What they're searching for is something that feels like the God of the scriptures is actually present again. Not as an idea, not as a tradition, but as a reality, something that moves, something that speaks, something that can be encountered. So if the nations think the answer is to become Israel, to take on the identity, the structure, the outward form, then something essential is lost. Because the distinction disappears, the sign becomes unclear. And what could have created a real question instead becomes something familiar, something explainable, something that does not challenge anything at all, But if something else happens, if the nations remain who they are, and yet the God of Israel becomes visible among them, if there is transformation, if there is life, if there is something that cannot be reduced to imitation, then something completely different appears, something that cannot be ignored, something that forces a deeper question, something that creates tension, not because it copies what exists, but because it reveals something real where it was not expected. So the question is not how closely can we resemble Israel? The question is not how accurately can we reproduce the system? The real question is far more unsettling, far more direct, and far more important. And it is this: where is the God of Israel? And can he be seen among the nations? Millions hear the story of Jesus through traditions shaped centuries later. This channel exists to rediscover the story as it began. This work is 100% supported by viewers like you. There is no organization behind it. If this work matters to you, consider becoming a member. The link is in the description.